Kylian Mbappé has always believed that true faith is shown not through words, but through actions. After a loss that reverberated worldwide, he found himself facing a silent mission, one hidden away from the cameras and crowds. This mission would test the strength of his heart in a way far removed from the football pitch. Let us know where you're watching from today. We love hearing your stories. It was a grey, misty morning in Paris. Kylian Mbappé sat by the window of his quiet home, a cup of tea warming his hands as he watched the drizzle fall against the glass. The news on television spoke of the world, mourning the death of Pope Francis, a man who had transcended religious boundaries and touched millions of lives. Mbappé wasn't Catholic, but he understood the loss deeply. True kindness, true leadership, he thought, had no denomination. It was something that connected hearts beyond borders or faiths. He watched images of St. Peter's Square filling with crowds from across the globe. Candles were lit, prayers whispered, hands held tightly. There was a solemnity in the air that even Paris's persistent rain couldn't dampen. Mbappé sipped his tea slowly, reflecting quietly on the power a single life could have in uniting so many. As he switched off the television, a thought lingered in his mind. What could he, Kylian Mbappé, do to honor such a legacy while staying true to his own path? Later that afternoon, as Mbappé prepared to head to training, his assistant intercepted him at the door. "Kylian, there's something strange," his assistant said, holding out a thick envelope heavier than usual. It was delivered by hand. No name, just the royal insignia. Mbappé raised an eyebrow. The golden crest of the British royal family was embossed on the wax seal. This was not something you received every day. He turned the envelope over in his hands, feeling the weight of it both physically and symbolically. "Any idea what this is about?" he asked. His assistant simply shook his head, looking just as puzzled. Mbappé decided not to open it right away. There was a respect, almost an instinct, telling him that this moment deserved quiet and care. He placed the envelope gently on the table and left for training, his mind restless and distracted. At the training facility, he went through his drills, completed his routines, and exchanged smiles with his teammates, but his thoughts never truly left the envelope waiting for him at home. By the time he returned, darkness had settled over the city, the streets slick with rain. Inside, the house felt different, quieter, as if even the walls were aware of the gravity of what was waiting. Mbappé sat down at the kitchen table, the envelope before him, untouched. He stared at it for a long moment. Part of him was curious, almost eager. Another part was hesitant. What if the message inside was more than he was ready to carry? Finally, with a deep breath, he reached for the envelope. His fingers hovered over the wax seal. He could almost feel the history behind it. Generations of letters, decrees, messages of both joy and sorrow sent under that very crest. He placed the envelope in his jacket pocket instead. Not here, he thought. Not under the harsh lights of the kitchen. He needed a quieter place, a sacred moment. He grabbed his keys and left the house, driving through the nearly empty streets of Paris. He wasn't entirely sure where he was headed, but he trusted his instincts. They led him to the Tuileries Gardens, one of his favorite places to clear his mind. Parking near the entrance, he stepped out into the crisp night air. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a freshness that carried the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. He pulled his jacket tighter around him and walked into the garden. The old trees loomed tall against the cloudy sky. Lamps lit the pathways with a soft, golden glow. It was peaceful, almost otherworldly. Finding a secluded bench near the fountain, Mbappé sat down. Only then, under the shelter of the ancient trees and the quiet murmur of the night, did he retrieve the envelope. His hands were steady as he broke the seal. Inside, folded neatly, was a letter written on thick ivory paper. A small object slipped out too, a delicate golden olive branch no larger than his thumb. It was simple, unadorned but powerful in its symbolism. He picked it up gently, turning it in his fingers, a symbol of peace, of unity, a reminder that even in a world divided, hope could still take root. Setting the branch carefully in his lap, Mbappé unfolded the letter. His eyes scanned the opening lines, written in a firm, elegant hand. To Kylian Mbappé, a man who represents the spirit of unity beyond borders and faiths. Mbappé paused, his heart beating faster. He continued reading. The letter spoke of the loss the world had suffered, not just in the passing of a religious leader, but in the passing of a symbol of compassion and understanding. It acknowledged the role individuals, like Mbappé, could play quietly and powerfully in continuing that spirit. But there was more. The words hinted at a request, a mission, a role Mbappé had never asked for, but now stood before him nonetheless. He folded the letter slowly, placing it back into the envelope with the golden olive branch. The message was clear. This wasn't about grand gestures or headlines. It was about silent acts of unity done without expectation of recognition. Mbappé leaned back against the bench, staring up at the clouded sky. For a moment, he felt small, just a man under the vast heavens. But within that smallness, he felt a stirring, a purpose. The rain began again, soft and steady, washing over Paris in a cleansing hush. Mbappé remained there for a long time, letting the water fall around him, the envelope clutched gently in his hand. Tomorrow, he knew, a different kind of journey would begin, one that few would ever see, but one that would matter nonetheless. The next morning, Paris woke to a soft drizzle and a sky the color of worn slate. Mbappé stood by his living room window once again, the letter and the small golden olive branch resting carefully on the table behind him. Sleep had come only in short bursts. His mind had been too preoccupied, turning over the words he had read, feeling the silent pressure they carried. He wasn't sure what to do. He wasn't even sure he was supposed to do anything. The letter hadn't demanded, it hadn't instructed, it had only offered an invitation to honor a spirit of unity without grand speeches or applause. The olive branch seemed to gleam slightly in the muted morning light, as if urging him to remember that real change often began quietly. Mbappé picked up the letter again and read through it slowly, carefully. The handwriting was steady, confident, but there was a vulnerability between the lines. A man nearing the twilight of his life, reaching out not to rulers or generals, but to those who moved hearts without banners or titles. At the bottom of the page, beneath the royal signature, were just a few simple words. In the quiet places of the world, great things grow. Mbappé set the paper down, feeling the gravity of it more than before. He needed time to think, and he knew exactly where to go. Pulling on a plain jacket and a cap low over his forehead, Mbappé left his home and drove through the winding streets of Paris. He avoided the main roads, choosing instead the smaller, quieter lanes. His destination was a modest church tucked between rows of Parisian buildings, a place he often visited when he needed to be unseen. Inside, the familiar scent of wood and incense filled the air. There were only a handful of people scattered across the wide room. Mbappé knelt in the corner, far from the door, and pressed his forehead to the coolness of the marble floor. He didn't pray for answers exactly. He prayed for wisdom, for strength to do what was right, even if no one ever knew. When he finished, he remained seated, legs folded beneath him, hands resting loosely on his knees. The city hummed faintly outside, life continuing at its usual frantic pace. But here, inside these walls, there was only silence and breath. An elderly woman passed him slowly, nodding in quiet respect. Mbappé returned the nod, grateful for the anonymity. Here he was not Kylian Mbappé, the football star. He was simply Kylian, a man like any other, trying to find the next step. The message weighed heavily on him, not because it was grand, but because it was invisible. There would be no cheering crowds, no headlines. There would be no assurance that his actions would make any difference at all. And yet, that was the point. It had to be done purely, freely, without expectation of reward. As the bells rang softly, Mbappé closed his eyes. In that moment he understood the letter wasn't a burden. It was a gift, a rare opportunity to serve quietly, as he believed true faith demanded. When he left the church, the rain had lightened to a fine mist. He walked slowly back to his car, feeling more grounded. The decision had been made in the silence of his heart. But how does one start changing the world without anyone noticing? The next few days passed with careful thought. Mbappé dedicated time after training sessions to researching organizations, small local groups doing work that often went unnoticed. Interfaith charities, community gardens, youth programs focused on peace and understanding. He made lists in an old notebook, writing down names and addresses with meticulous care. He spoke with a trusted friend who handled his charity work, making it clear that any involvement must be kept absolutely anonymous. No logos, no press releases, not even a whisper. "Are you sure, Killian?" his friend asked, frowning slightly. "You could inspire so many if people knew." "That's not the point," Mbappé replied quietly. "If it's about me, it loses its meaning." His friend nodded, understanding, and promised to act as his silent hand, ensuring everything would be done discreetly. Mbappé felt a sense of calm he hadn't felt in days. One evening, after a match at Parc des Princes, Mbappé lingered in the changing room longer than usual. His teammates joked and laughed around him, celebrating another hard-fought victory. Mbappé smiled along, but remained quiet inside. Victory on the pitch was sweet, but he felt drawn to something else now, a different kind of triumph, one measured not by goals or trophies, but by invisible ripples spreading through quiet acts of kindness. Later that night, while the city slept, Mbappé drove to the outskirts of town. In the back seat of his car were small, simple packages, donations of supplies to a community center that supported families from diverse backgrounds. No cameras waited there, no banners were raised. He left the boxes by the back door under cover of darkness and drove away before anyone could see. In the following weeks, this pattern became part of his life. Silent visits to struggling neighborhoods, unmarked donations to organizations promoting dialogue and understanding between different faiths. Small acts, almost insignificant on their own, but carrying the weight of intention. Each time he planted a seed of hope, Mbappé remembered the golden olive branch tucked safely away at home. No one thanked him, no one applauded, and he didn't want them to. One afternoon, walking through a quieter part of Paris, Mbappé noticed something that stopped him in his tracks. In a small park, someone had planted a real olive tree, young, slender, but resilient against the cool Parisian wind. A simple plaque at its base read, "For those who build peace without needing to be seen." Mbappé stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, head slightly bowed. He had no idea who had planted it, or if it had anything to do with the ripples he had sent out. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe not. But standing there, he felt connected to something larger than himself, a quiet current of goodwill that didn't need a name attached to thrive. He smiled softly and whispered a prayer of thanks, his breath misting in the cool air. As he walked away, the city buzzed around him, unaware of the silent mission unfolding in its midst. And that was exactly how it was meant to be. The final days of spring arrived quietly in Paris. Trees bloomed shyly along the pavements, and the days stretched a little longer, casting soft golden light over the city's familiar streets. Mbappé moved through them unnoticed, as he preferred, carrying within him a peace he hadn't fully understood when the journey began. His work, though invisible, had become part of his rhythm. He no longer needed reminders. He no longer measured the impact. He simply lived it. The letter from King Charles remained tucked away in a simple wooden box at home alongside the small golden olive branch. Occasionally, Mbappé would glance at it before leaving the house, not to reignite a sense of duty, but to ground himself in what truly mattered. In the world's noise, it was easy to be swept into fame, victories, disappointments, headlines. But the real work, he knew now, was done in the silence between all of that. One late afternoon, after a light training session, Mbappé visited a modest community garden in the heart of Paris. It wasn't a place he had funded or even helped directly, but it was the kind of place he had hoped to encourage. Spaces where strangers could meet, learn and grow side by side. He walked among the rows of new plants, their leaves trembling gently under a kind spring breeze. Children knelt in the dirt, laughing as they planted seeds. Older neighbors shared tools and quiet jokes. A woman wearing a scarf carefully helped a boy who spoke mostly French. Neither seemed to mind the gaps in language. Mbappé lingered at the edge, watching. No one paid him any special attention. He was simply another man walking through a garden unnoticed. And yet, standing there, he felt full, a kind of fullness that trophies and goals had never quite brought him. It wasn't about being remembered. It wasn't even about being thanked. It was about knowing that somewhere in the cracks of the noisy world, peace was taking root. He smiled to himself, hands tucked into his pockets, and walked away, leaving the scene exactly as he had found it. No one would know he had been there. No one needed to. A few evenings later, Mbappé sat by his window again, Paris's lights flickering softly beyond the rain-slicked glass. He thought of all the places he would never see, all the lives he would never meet, touched in some way by actions that bore no name, and it was enough. He reached for the small wooden box. Opening it, he held the olive branch between his fingers, its golden leaves catching the faint light. He closed his eyes and offered a silent prayer. Not for recognition, not even for success, but simply for the strength to keep walking the quiet road. The world outside bustled on, unaware, and Mbappé, heart steady and quiet, remained where he was, a silent gardener of unseen hope. Somewhere, far beyond the hills of Paris, other olive branches might be growing. And somewhere in the quiet places of the world, great things would continue to bloom, unnoticed but unstoppable. If this story moved you, share it with someone. Spread the message of love, peace and unity. And let's continue to make the world a better place. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more stories that matter.